Welcome back everyone to another tutorial. In the YouTube comment section, somebody asked me how to make a play controlling using the Playmaker function. And that's what I spent some time on to check this, because my usual character to the right has a normal script which is written in C#, and now the left character going to the right, to the left, and a jump is now made by Playmaker. And today I want to show you how I did this and also point out some of the differences. So I've set up a basic scene to now make a character move by Playmaker. For you to start out, just have a couple of blocks with box colliders or any kind of collider so the character can walk. I would recommend to have a box collider, perhaps have two. I have a background just to have it nice, but you don't need this, of course. Yeah, and that's it, what you need for this tutorial. For this tutorial, I downloaded a free asset, which has a running, an idle, an attack, and whatnot. And today I just would like to use, let's say, the idle, running, jump. So let's get into the night. And let's first make here an empty. Make sure everything is 0. And let's call this player. And within the player, we make sure we also tag it as a player, because all the other tutorials will use the player tag or any tag you define here. Now, one thing, we can see all these different kind of animations, and let's start by importing the idle. And how you're going to do this is quite simple. You can just drag your character here, and let's just call it idle 1. And what I'm going to do is put this night idle 1 into the player, and I'm just going to call this the sprite, because this is also the general sprite for this character, so I can see it. I'm going to put it on the player layer. Just make sure that you have your layers fixed, and I'm just going to leave it on 0. Just going to drag it here, and on the player we have then a already, as you can see, a nice idle. And what I can do is just create a new clip, and let's add run here, save. And for run, I'm just gonna check where's this walk. Just gonna drag it in, and if you play, wow, it's running very fast, so just drag it out a little bit. Yeah, like this maybe, however you like. Good, that's the run. And we're gonna create another clip, call it jump 1. Sorry, I have some other clips which there also are. Just gonna call jump 1. And if correct, there is a jump. And jump 1 and jump 2. Yeah, I will just have this one frame. And in the animator, in this animator here, I'm just gonna set this up very fast. So we have any state. I prefer to have this at the upper side. I'm just gonna put run down and jump to the right. And I want to make a transition to run, and from run back to idle. From any state, make a transition to jump, and from jump, make a transition to run, or make a transition to idle. And we will also need a couple parameters here, and one should be a float. Let's call this the speed. Then we're going to add a bool, grounded. Ground means he's on the ground. And I'm going to add a trigger, a jump trigger. Right. And if I want to go to jump, I don't have any exit time. I just want to set the jump trigger to true. And if I'm going to go back to running, I want to say that the speed is greater than 0.1. and grounded is true. And on this one, it's speed less than 0.1 plus grounded is true. And from idle to run, let's remove the exit time here. Just speed greater than 0.1. And here we're going to do speed less than 0.1. Good. And now let's get our character moving. So let's go to the player here. And here we're going to add two components. We're going to add a capsule collider. And it's spawned a little bit above. So let's make sure to have the capsule around the character. Something like this. However you like. And we're going to add a rigid body 2D. Let's freeze the rotation on the z-axis, otherwise it fall down. And let's make sure that the collision detection is continuous, because if it's discrete, it can lead to strange errors or bugs. Continuous is in general a little bit better for your character. Now let's go on my player and let's make a new FSM. And this FSM we will call move. Just let's call it move. And everything will happen within one state. So that is quite weird if you compare it to the other tutorials which I'm making, but the movement will happen in one state. And the first state is the get axis. And the get axis will be horizontal. And I'm typing it, and I will show you in the preferences project settings that in the input manager, by default, there are several, let's say, keys fixed. For example, the jump is always bound to the space, and horizontal is left, right, AD. And there's also some basic topics set here. So you can just type horizontal, but please cross-check in your project if the input manager is correct, set up like this. And in get axis, we will take a multiplier of 3.5, which is the same speed as my other character. And we're gonna put a new variable and call it horizontal speed. The next topic I want to do is set velocity to d. And I'm just gonna add the horizontal speed here. So we set the velocity to d by the horizontal speed, and we select also every frame. Then we will add set float value. And we want to have the float value of horizontal. No, we want to have the horizontal speed here. We're going to make a new variable here, which we're going to call actual speed. All right, and then we're going to add float absolute. So you can already see that in Playmaker, you're almost coding right now. And this will be the actual speed. And this makes absolute numbers from the float. And then we will do set animator float. And here we're going to specify an object because the sprite has the animator, and we can select the parameter speed, and the value should be actual speed. Great. And of all frames, every frame, also here every frame, I always forget to check this, every frame should be selected. If we now go into the game, then we realize that there is no camera installed. So let's just go here, add a camera, and let's, the camera, where's the camera? Let's do orthographic view, 5, let's just put it here. it sees the character, which is great in game. And let's try again. And as you can see, now you already have movement from left to right. Great, but the character is not flipping from left to right. So let's fix that. And also I would like the camera to follow the player. And the easy way to do is you can also do it in Playmaker. But I would like to recommend to use Cinemachine, which is a package. You can just install Cinemachine. It's free and you can just update it or install it. And with Cinemachine, you have a lot of options. Also for camera, what I would definitely recommend that you select is post-processing, especially if you want to make your game nicer later. So go to the Cinemachine, create virtual camera. Good. The virtual camera is connected with this camera. This camera just received now a Cinemachine brain. And within this camera, let's call this perhaps the player camera. We can do follow, and we're gonna follow the player. Right. And look at target. Also be the player, I suppose. Yeah, so now we just look at the target or at this player, which is great. And you can do a lot of things here to smoothen, look ahead. You know, if you go run a little bit to the right, the camera will tilt to the right, and these kind of things you can all set here, which is quite cool. I really recommend it. But okay, so that's setting up the camera. The camera should not follow you. I will show this in a second when I set up how to change from left to right. But before changing to left to right, let's make sure to name the state, because it's important to name your FSMs. Right, so let's add an FSM, a new one, and let's call this FSM direction player. Good. So, and the first state will be called right. And within this state, we're going to add a couple of actions to make sure that it's right. So we're going to start with, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this. I'm going to go to the sprite. I'm going to drag in the sprite renderer here. And I'm going to set the property. And I'm going to put flip X, and I'm not going to check it because it starts facing right. So if I check it, it faces left. And within this Playmaker states, I want to determine if you're going to the left or the right. So first I'm going to set the property flip X, so it starts facing right. Then I'm just going to get axis, which we did earlier, horizontal, so 3.5, which was the movement speed, and we're going to add a new variable, and we're just going to call this one move speed. All right, and then we're going to every frame, very good. Then we're going to do a float clamp, of the move speed, and the minimum value is -1 and the maximum value is 1. That way we won't exceed these figures. Just going to add then one more action, which is going to convert the float to an int. Yeah, I know it's nice coding in Playmaker. And we're going to do the move speed into a new int variable, and let's call this the direction. And also every frame. And then we do an int switch. And within the int switch, we're going to use the direction. And one switch, if it's -1, we're going to send a new event, which is called then turn left, and every frame. Great, I'm just going to also add the event turn right. And I'm just going to copy this state over. Just going to press null. connect this one. I'm gonna delete this transition, and here instead of -1 I have 1, and I go to turn right at the state and go back, and let's call this state left. And here, of course, set property is the flip axis is set to false, so it will flip the character, as you can see here. This is what it does. And this should enable us now to turn from left to right. Moving to right, and I'm turning to the left. So after having now the right direction and the movement, let's also make the jump. One thing I forgot to mention is that in the movement, before I had it like this, and you should mark this one, and the factor should be none, because this affects, let's say, your movement all the time, and it will add a 0 to your y-axis, and this we want to prevent, obviously. Right, so let's make another FSM. We're gonna call this FSM the jump FSM, and the first state I wanna set animator bool of a specified object, and this one is the grounded, and I want to have it checked, because as long as I'm not jumping, I don't want to be not grounded. And then I'm gonna get input, get button down, and as before, there is a jump button specified in your preferences with the space key as default. Then we're gonna add a transition. So by default, you're on the ground, and once you hit space, then you will start jumping. So let's call this wait, or let's just call this input. And then we're gonna make a new state, and this one we're gonna call the jump state. So, and the first action in the jump is to set the velocity to d of the owner. And also here, I'm just gonna make sure to remove this one. And here though, I will just put a figure, a 6. I can also make a variable if I want to make this variable changeable, which is a good idea, especially if you want to have speed boosts. So perhaps let's make a variable, use variable, and call this jump force. And here in jump force, I'm just going to set the value to, let's make it 6 for now. And what you can do is make it visible in the inspector, and then you can change the jump force here in the inspector, and you don't have to go in the Playmaker, which is pretty neat if you ask me. Good, jump force 1, not every frame, only once. Then we're going to set the animator bool to not grounded anymore, because before you were grounded, but now the sprite should be not grounded anymore. So unchecked, and we're going to set a animator trigger right afterwards. We don't want every frame here, no. And it's gonna go in the sprite, and this is the jump trigger, and we trigger now the jump. So the jump animation will play. And now I want to know if I go down, if I'm actually falling down or not. So what I'm going to do is get velocity 2D. And again, it moves it to the top. Get velocity 2D of the y, and I'm going to add a new variable, and let's call this the y speed. And I'm just going to get the y speed, and then I'm going to float compare. And I didn't mark every frame, but you also have to mark every frame. Let's do this right away. Every frame I will check the speed, and every frame I will compare, and I will compare the Y speed with minus 0.3, and if it's less than, I want to have a finish. Great, and in the next state, now I just want to make sure that everything is correct. Looks so fine. And here we have a collision because I want to know when I'm back on the ground. Collision to the event, collision tag ground. So that's why it's important to have your blocks, let's say ground. Oops, I should lock this one. And if I hit the ground, I will set the finish event there. And let's see how this works. And you will have now this nice moving sun in the background, and your character is actually jumping, which is pretty cool. Right, great, you have now a jumping character. But one thing, and now I will show you something. Let's make it 2, so it's the same size. And I just want to show you the difference. And also it's interesting, now you have, let's say, 2 players. And what will happen is that I can move both because they all listen to the different things. But you can perhaps see already a little bit of difference. First of all, the character to the left, his animation is a little bit off. If I jump, I have a very floaty feel to the left character, just like the sun in the background, which I'm going to delete now because I had enough of it. I have a very floaty feel, and this is a little bit the difference between Playmaker and scripting. Now, what I could do now here, and this is now, of course, optional, but what I could do to make his fall at least a little bit faster, because it's like floating around, I can, first of all, I want to get the axis again, the horizontal one, and I'm just going to store it again in the move speed. And the multiplier is 3.5 like last time. And I'm going to do this every frame. I'm going to get velocity. I'm going to get velocity on I speed every frame. So I'm going to get the axis and the move speed, and I'm going to get the velocity and the Y speed. And what I'm going to do here is to use a float multiplier. Float multiply. And where is it? And I'm going to multiply the Y speed with a slight amount every frame. And let me just make sure that the order doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to put get axis. I'm going to put get velocity, float multiplier 1.2 here. You can also make again a variable out of this and put it here to the left. Let's actually do this. Make a new variable is full multiply, and let's go here to the full multiply. It's in the inspector, basic value 1.2. And then finally we will do set velocity to the on the owner, and here we're going to do the move speed, and here we will have the Y speed, and the Y speed is now multiplied by 1.2. Every frame, of course, I have to set the velocity and not just one frame. So let's see if this works. the character is going down a little bit faster. I can still say perhaps I want to change this variable, and then of course I should do this here to here, make the jump force 7, and let's see if we can get close to the code. Not really, does it? Doesn't really do it. So here you can just see a big difference. If you want to code within Playmaker, it gets quite complicated with these kind of figures. And let's say on my other character, I just have a very simple script with just a couple lines of code. And let's just have a look at that. So if I go to the normal, if I go here to the normal player, I have maybe a little bit too many scripts. Oops, I have to better jump script twice. I have this script here. So if I just look at this small formula, which just has two public floats, a fall multiplier and a low jump multiplier, getting the rigid body, and in case I'm falling, you will see you have this math here of the factor 2 up, looking at the gravity of the game, and then the fall multiplier over time delta, which gives a much smoother effect. If the velocity is positive, you're jumping up, and with this one you can actually have then a long jump or a small short jump by tapping just the get button. So this is very interesting. So yeah, you can just pause and get that code if you like, but perhaps let's try it on this player. So instead of doing now all these topics, we just have the floaty one, and I'm just going to add here the better jump script. Just going to leave it the same and remove here one. Why does it have two? That's kind of interesting. So they're now the same. And if we now have a look here, just by adding this 2 lines of code, well, it doesn't feel the same yet because probably the jump force is higher. So let's just change the jump force here a little bit to, let's say, 5. And let's have another try. Let's have another go at it. And so if I press now long, and I have a small jump. And there you can just really see the difference between coding and Playmaker for character movement. So thanks all for watching. I hope it was helpful. Please subscribe if it was. If not, leave a comment. If you want to hear about other things, just let me know, and see you all next time. Cheers.